Biggie Smalls was one of the most influential rappers of all time. He put the whole East Coast on his back, and the West Coast was dominating the game. But before he even dropped his second album, he was tragically gunned down at just 24 years old. His murder has never been solved. But today, we're breaking down the real story of who might have been behind the hit. Back in March 1997, Biggie was out in LA to promote his second album, Life After Death. Tupac had just been killed a few months earlier, and Biggie told a radio show called The Doghouse that he hired a security team because of how crazy the East vs West Coast beef was getting. Biggie was at the Soul Train Music Awards on March 7th, and the next day, he was supposed to fly out to London. But instead of going overseas and getting away from the situation, Biggie stayed in LA and went to an after party at a car museum the next night. Not getting on the plane turned out to be a deadly mistake, and before the night was over, one of the greatest rappers of all time was dead. Biggie and the rest of the Bad Boy Records crew were leaving the party to hit another spot just after midnight. They hopped in two SUVs with Diddy in the front car, Biggie in the second, and a security team following both of them. The street outside was packed with people leaving the party, and Biggie's SUV stopped at a light just 50 yards from the museum. That's when a Chevy Impala pulled up and the driver started letting off shots. Biggie got hit 4 times, and one of the rounds went through his colon, liver, heart, and lung. His crew rushed him to the hospital, but the wounds were too much, and he was tragically pronounced dead less than an hour later. After Biggie died, all kinds of rumors started flying about who was behind the hit, but nobody had any real answers. Biggie's security team tried to chase the shooter down after it happened, but they couldn't keep up through all the traffic and lost the shooter. One of the most popular theories about Biggie's death is that he was taken out by a corrupt LAPD cop who was working with Suge Knight. Russell Poole was assigned to the case, and after a few months of digging through evidence, he started accusing a cop named David Mack and his friend Amir Muhammad of being involved with the hit. According to Poole, Mack came up in the same area of Compton as Suge, and they were always close. A dude named Psycho Mike is the one who told Poole about Muhammad. Psycho Mike's story was believed by a lot of people for a long time, but when his police interview leaked, it made the theory a lot shakier. Psycho Mike is a schizophrenic murderer who couldn't even identify Muhammad. He couldn't remember his name, got all the details wrong about what he looked like, and said he grew up in Compton when Muhammad was actually from Virginia. But just because he was wrong about Muhammad doesn't mean that Poole was off about David Mack. Mack is one of the most notorious cops in LA history. Back in '93, he was given an award for heroism after he shot a drug dealer that allegedly threatened his partner, but later it turned out that they had lied about the whole situation and planted a gun on the dealer. Then a few months after Biggie was killed, Mack's girlfriend started working at Bank of America. The two of them worked out a plan to steal over $700K from the bank, but Mack's girlfriend ended up flipping on him and he got hit with a 14-year sentence. Poole brought all of his evidence against Mack to the chief of police. Poole thought he had enough to bring the case to trial, but the chief of police told him to stop investigating other cops. Then Poole was forced to retire a couple years later. Another theory is that Diddy had his own artists taken out. According to some people, he saw how many Tupac records Death Row sold after his death, and Diddy knew Biggie dying would make his label a ton of money. There's not any evidence that Diddy was behind the hit, but on the night it went down, he did pull a move that a lot of people think is sketchy. Diddy was in the car ahead of Biggie and allegedly told his driver to run the red light outside the museum because he didn't want to sit out in the open. So instead of keeping their crew all together, Diddy left Biggie behind, and that's when the shooter pulled up and killed him. Since Biggie's murder happened so soon after Tupac died, people started linking the cases immediately. Obviously, everyone knew they were the faces of the war between the East and West Coast, and a retired LAPD detective says that Diddy is the one who ordered the hit on Tupac in Vegas. In 2006, the investigation into Biggie's death was reopened because the city wanted more evidence to defend themselves against a lawsuit. Biggie's mom had filed a $500 million wrongful death suit, and LA definitely didn't want to pay up. A detective named Greg Kading worked on the case for years, and he thinks that Suge Knight ordered the Biggie hit because Diddy's the one who put a bag on Tupac's head. Tupac's death has never been solved either, but there's been rumors about Diddy being involved ever since it happened. One of the major theories about Tupac's death is that it was revenge for a beating he put on a Crip named Orlando Anderson a few hours before the shooting. After Biggie died, rumors were going around that the Southside Crips were the ones who took him out. When the case was reopened in 2006, Kading started going after a Southside Crip named Keith D. Keith D was moving major weight in Compton in the 90s and got booked in a federal drug case the same year Biggie died. Kading brought him in and threatened him with a 25 to life sentence to get Keith to talk about the Biggie murder. Keith just told him that one wasn't us. According to Keith, he actually talked to Biggie at the party the night he died. He says he offered to give Biggie more protection while he was in LA, but Biggie turned him down and said the FBI was all over him. Apparently, Biggie didn't want Keith and his guys catching any federal heat. But if he had taken him up on the offer, there's a chance he'd still be alive today. Last year, Kading told Fox 11 Los Angeles that the case is finally solved, but it just hasn't been prosecuted yet. And according to him, the man responsible was hip-hop's own boogeyman, Suge Knight. Back in the 90s, Suge was the scariest dude in the game. He ran death row like a mob boss and handed out beatings to anyone who crossed him. There were always rumors that he had something to do with Biggie getting killed, and now Kading says he knows for sure. Suge was already locked up when Biggie got killed, and Kading says he used his girlfriend to get the hit taken care of. In 2009, the LAPD and FBI brought the woman in for questioning. Kading says while she was telling them what went down, she had tears in her eyes because she was so afraid. Snitching on Suge could be a death sentence if he found out, so the woman definitely had a good reason to be scared. Kading says that she pretended to be a legal assistant so she could talk to Suge in jail without their conversations being recorded.
That allows her to go in, sit down with Suge, and have unmonitored visits. Deputies can't overlisten on the phone, they can't stand there and overhear the conversation. So that's how it was set up, so that she could have confidential conversations.
According to documents from the LAPD, Suge worked with her to help him coordinate the murder of Biggie. Suge told her to get in touch with a member of the Bloods named Poochie and pay him for the hit. Poochie was associated with the YPUR, and there are pics of him chilling with Suge at parties. But by the time Kading connected him to Biggie's murder, Poochie was already dead. Back in 2003, Poochie was shot 10 times while driving his motorcycle, and Kading never had the chance to question him. But even though Poochie isn't around to talk about what went down that night, Kading is so convinced that he thinks the case should be officially closed. One retired detective said that saying the case is over isn't enough to convince everyone. But last year, Mob James told DJ Vlad that he had it right. James is an OG with the YPUR, and he told Vlad that Poochie was a hitter for real.
Was Poochie known as a shooter?
Yeah,
Yeah.
he was a hitter for real, for real.
Okay.
According to him, everyone around death row back then knew Poochie was a shooter. It just took everyone else a long time to catch up. There have been a lot of wild rumors about Biggie's death. Some people think the FBI took Tupac and Biggie out to stop the East Coast and West Coast war. Others say both of them are still alive and chilling in Cuba. But Mob James says the whole situation is way more simple than that. James says that at the end of the day, it was a simple street beef between Death Row and Bad Boy Records. And like a lot of beef, it kept heating up until people started dying. He thinks people want to make it all some big conspiracy theory, but that's just because they love Tupac and Biggie so much, and them dying over some petty drama doesn't feel right. We'll probably never have a 100% concrete answer about who really killed Biggie. Kading and other people say it was Suge and Poochie, but Poochie died before he was interrogated, and Suge definitely isn't talking. But at the end of the day, the rap game lost one of its most legendary artists when he was just 24 years old. There's no telling what Biggie could have accomplished if he got on that plane to London, but unfortunately, we'll never know. Rest in peace to the notorious B.I.G.